Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by repeat offender, the expert's expert, David C. Baker. David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Like how many times you have to show up before you get a gold jacket?
Yeah, Blair's one ahead of you. I think Blair's got 3 under his belt, so.
Wow, you must have been really scraping the barrel to have him on that many times. That's sad.
Savage. Cool. Okay, so we were corresponding over email before this interview about an article that you published recently that it just was so great. I was like, we need to talk about that. The overall article is about positioning, and that is a huge subject of conversation on this show and elsewhere and other things that I do. Critically important. Critically important. But the angle that you had in the article, I just loved, which was the 5 things that happen right after you narrow your focus. And it's just so great. And I wanted to bring it on, have you share it with the audience, and maybe have a little discussion around, drill into some of those points.
That sounds good. This one came to me really quickly when I was writing it, and sometimes like the ones that take me hours and hours don't resonate quite as much. But then this was just lying in bed one night thinking, oh my goodness. You're kind of thinking back over the calls you've had with clients that day, and you start to see them voicing the same sort of concerns about a possible positioning decision. And then you realize, oh, a lot of people think this. I should think about it in a new way. So it was a fun article to write.
Great. Yeah, sometimes the good ones just, boom, fall out of your head fully formed. Yes, and one of the benefits of narrowing your focus is recognizing patterns like that.
Yeah, somebody said that one time. Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. The first, well, do we need to do a tiny preamble on why would you even do positioning in the first place? Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little
Probably.
bit.
For somebody that's never listened to your podcast before, then it's hard to imagine anybody that listens to it regularly would need that. But to me, I mean, I'll just give you 60 seconds here and just a broad sweep overview. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, the moat that protected you from the competition was largely geographic. And so you just had to be better than the options around you. And then when the internet really changed the world, all of a sudden it was exciting until we realized something else. But at first it was exciting because now, goodness, we can work anywhere in the world. And the flip side of that was, oh my goodness, everybody can work here. I no longer have a geographic moat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the first thing, is that I'm going to need to be specialized, because why in the world would somebody work with me? Because I no longer have the advantage of geography.
Mm-hmm.
But the other was that the world around us got so complicated, and there's just no way to be an expert in that many things. And so it was sort of a survival strategy. And there's lots more to talk about it, but fundamentally, sort of philosophically, that's the whole point, is that you've got to go really deep and narrow. There's some dangers in doing that, but you've got to do that, or you just don't have, you just can't have much impact. You can't make much money. You can't see the patterns. It just goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. Cool. So let's get into the 5 points. So let's say you're working with someone, I'm sure you've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people on their positioning, or firms, I should say, and you convince them to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So like we're past that point, they're bought in, and you're in a meeting, and eureka, this is it. This is the one that we should try. Mm-hmm. This is the hypothesis. I know when I do it with someone, I'm like, this is it. This is the one, and it's as a starting point, you'll iterate on it, but you can feel, I work on it with enough people. All of a sudden you can be like, that's the one, because it's immediately memorable. I immediately have a Rolodex moment. I'm immediately like, I know who to reach out to see if maybe I should introduce you. Like all of a sudden it clicks. There's a clear value proposition. So great. And I've seen the same thing that you have seen, that you wrote in the article, is that you do it and it's like, okay, put this on your LinkedIn, put this on your, as the headline on your website, or, wherever they're going to put it, email signature. And they start to, the next day, it's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not in the email signature. They get cold feet. They run it by someone. Someone
Right.
talks them out of it. So what happens right after you've come up with what seems like a really good starting point for a positioning statement, and then they chicken out?
Yeah, well, and I love this because we can talk ourselves out of so many good ideas. And And what's worse, we can take months to talk ourselves out of good ideas, just wasting all kinds of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the first thing that happens is really not much. you're you're not all that smarter the next day, and I think people. I'm not sure why they think they should be, but it just dawns on them the next day. Okay, now they're claiming something, and they're not all that smarter. But in relation to that, one thing changes that just revolutionizes your consulting practice or your advisory practice, and that's that the rate of learning accelerates, because now what you are seeing, especially not immediately, but pretty close to that decision, you're starting to see one firm after another that shares more characteristics. They could be vertical or horizontal characteristics or anything like that, but they share, there's more opportunity to see the patterns, because I'm going to say, okay, I'm only going to work with tattoo shops from now on, even though I've worked with all kinds of other, like, okay, it's not like your observational powers are better the next day. It's just that you're working with one after another, and the rate of learning is so much more accelerated. I live on 61 acres in Tennessee, and I think of it sort of like this. And I'm always getting people asking if they can hunt on our property. And we kind of say no, because, people with guns, we don't know. It doesn't seem like a good combination. But but when they ask to hunt, they don't say, can I hunt on your property? They say, can I hunt wild turkey or deer or whatever it is specifically, or coyote or fox? Those are the big ones that they hunt. And so they're hunting something very specific. And because they've done this for a while, they know what gear, they know what time of day, they know where to park themselves to wait for something to appear. And their rate of learning, once they decided to choose something very specific, was just accelerated. That's what changes first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, so it's not like you're going to have, to be honest, I have seen overnight positioning successes where someone changes their positioning and they're just like immediately start getting leads. People just like, here's my phone number, we need to talk right now. Like
Right.
you're like, okay, yep, that one's going to work. But you're right. You're not instantly smarter. But and of course, I suppose it's obvious that if you spend more time focusing down, you're going to notice more things. And that is going to dramatically set you apart from your competition, because it pretty quickly, if you stick with it, it'll happen pretty quickly, because you can find out where all the watering holes are, find out what their specific language is. You can start using specific language. Like if your target market is doctors, you won't say clients, you'll say patients, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
You can start using their lingo and jargon in your marketing materials, and it'll automatically set you apart from any other generalist. So you just start pulling ahead of the pack very quickly.
And that's also when your conversations from that point forward will elicit a comment that sounds something like this. There'll be a pause, and they'll say, dang, it's like, you know me. Like, you've got a camera in my office. And obviously you don't, but that's how well you can see. When I'm talking with somebody on the phone, if I'm feeling particularly on that day, I'll often say, can I take a guess at what your revenue is? And I'll get it pretty close. And that's when there's this weird pause. It's like, how did you know that?
Yeah. Yeah, you can start doing something I think is an extremely black belt move with your prospective clients, which is something Oren Klaff calls a cold read, where they don't even tell you. Like normally, most people, they need to have like the why conversation and uncover what the desired outcome is, and the client's asking for Motrin, but what are they really trying to solve? Is it a headache or a lower back pain? Like, what are you really trying to solve? But when you focus way, way down on an industry, you can tell them what their problems are, like 7 times out of 10, before they even open their mouths.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. All right. Well, that it's very related to this number two point. Your imposter syndrome is a false flag. So let's talk about what imposter syndrome is a little bit, because I know you've written some really good stuff on that, and then why it's the resistance, why it's a phony objection.
Yeah. So imposter syndrome is just simply feeling like you're not quite big enough to fill the shoes that you're claiming, or something like that. I had a little moment of this early this week, I was keynoting a conference down in Miami Beach, and it was for a bunch of really high-end firms that rented out unique event furniture and fixtures and so on. And I knew a fair bit about it, but it was out of my normal feel of competence. And I just remember standing up there and saying, oh, I've tasted competence and I've tasted something less than competence, and I kind of don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, so that's what it is. And this one just makes me smile, because once you mention this to somebody, then they grin and say, yep, you caught me. And so what we're talking about here is, after the positioning decision, you are making some unique claims around expertise that you haven't made before, and all of a sudden you feel insecure or unable to fulfill those promises. And you feel like you're cheating your clients or something. And what just makes me laugh is, and this is what I tell them, it's like, well, yesterday, before you made a decision to specialize or focus, you would have gladly taken this work, and you would have never thought twice about whether you were delivering value or not. And it's like, and now you're concerned?
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
It's like naming it somehow, or making it's not even naming it, because it's more like just making a claim.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I wish is that would have occurred to them earlier, because when people come to me, I've worked with 900 some firms and then lots of others in seminars, like kind of casually. And so it's about 50 a year. And when those firms come to me and want to adjust their positioning, never once has somebody come to me and said, I want to be more effective for my clients. Never once. It's almost always, I really want to control the lead generation process for my firm, and I have no idea how to build a marketing plan on my positioning. And it's like, well, I don't either, so let's fix it.
Yeah. I want to actually illustrate this with some tangibles just to make sure that this lands. So imagine that you're a business coach, and a CPA comes to you and says, hey, I'd love to get some business coaching. And you'd say, sure, let's do it. And so what David here is saying is that saying on your website, I'm a business coach for CPAs, now suddenly makes them nervous. And if a CPA came to them, they'd be like feeling imposter syndrome, because like, how could I possibly do a good job? But you would have taken the CPA yesterday.
Right. It's crazy, isn't it? It's
like,
just
I'll work
fun.
with anyone, but I won't pick one, because then that will make me nervous.
Right. And the truth is that today you aren't any more qualified to work with this CPA than you were yesterday. But within a week, I'll bet you're more qualified. And within a couple years, you will just completely own that space. So it's just funny to point it out to people. Nobody's ever been offended when I laugh at them, but they kind of like smile and say, yeah, I guess you're right.
So I wonder if that, just to explore this just for a second, I wonder if they're naming the thing that they're feeling, they're sort of naming it wrong. Like what, because I've seen the exact same thing. It's observable. It's an observable phenomenon. So what is it? Do you have any idea what it is? What fear does that claim trigger?
I wonder if it's the fear of getting caught. So in other words, if they're not specialized in coaching CPAs, then during a conversation in a client relationship, something might come up and you could say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. Or, that's different from an architect I just worked with.
Oh, they've got wiggle room.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if that's part of it. But if I hang a shingle on my website that says I'm an expert in such and such, by God, I better be. And it's pretty easy to find out if you aren't. So it's just you're too far ahead of your that first day, and you haven't quite caught up with yourself. And yeah, it's I don't know. There's something really human about it, though, and I don't see any patterns in terms of, it seems like everybody sort of thinks that way. Now, where it doesn't happen is if somebody already has sort of an unstated positioning, but they're not getting any benefit from it in the marketplace because they're just not attracting the right clients.
Yeah, that actually happened with me. before I even knew, when I was purely generalist mindset, I was very horizontal specialization for a long time in my consulting. I was like really well known and good at a particular technology,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in high demand. So I basically fell in a pile of money, and the I was I backed my way into a really strong positioning by writing a book that was fairly popular. So so the book did all the positioning work for me. I never was out there. I didn't really articulate it myself on my website. My website was a typical garbage,
Right.
nothing resume, and but the book did the positioning for me. So when I started to realize what positioning was, and it was like, oh, it'd be kind of good if I did this intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a thought. So when I pivoted to doing what I'm doing now, I was super duper specific. So the other thing the thing about saying I do business coaching for CPAs or whatever it is, it removes that wiggle room where you can ask, like you kind of like have permission to ask dumb questions about
Mm-hmm.
their business if you hadn't said that.
Right.
So let's just look at it from this angle for 1 second. Like, to the dear listener, why should you be allowed to ask dumb questions, right? Like if you're an expert, like get there, be an expert, not at what you do, but at the outcomes you deliver. So become good at delivering positive outcomes, or like outsized and maybe even remarkable outcomes for your clients. You can hit I don't know, you can get on base or hit a double all day long by just being a good business coach, I suppose. But if you go deeper and you want to hit home runs and grand slams on a regular basis, the way to do it is to get to know your clients better. And the way to do that is by picking one, deciding what you want to be when you grow up.
Right. And you may cover this in other episodes, but just for somebody that might be confused about vertical versus horizontal. So we've been using a vertical example of a CPA, but let's say you were a counselor and your horizontal focus was teenage youth. That would be, all of these examples work. So that people aren't confused, there's lots of different ways to position. It doesn't have to be by like a vertical CPA, sort of a SIC or NAICS code. It could be horizontal as well. And all the same principles apply.
Yes, right. I do talk about it a lot. I'll probably do a follow-up episode after this. I haven't talked about it in a while. But you can segment a target market by psychographics, demographics, interest, a million things, worldview, whatever. It's like, but whatever. When you've got a good one, when you've got a good target market. I don't love that term, but it's easy to understand. So when you've got a good target market, when you tell someone you help that target market and they say, oh, I should introduce you to my cousin Bob, because they immediately have a Rolodex moment.
Right.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to number 3. I love this one, and I think I've got some questions about it for you, like your experience with it. But number 3 was, you don't have to turn down work that doesn't fit the new focus.
Yeah. And this, like, I didn't used to believe this. I kind of was hard and fast, like, grow up, make a big decision, quit ripping people off. My usual sort of overkill approach. And I realized, oh, that's so unreasonable. In fact, that was my whole, I think, consulting gig in the first 10 years. It's like, here's what you do. If you don't have the courage to do it, then goodbye. It was just a really terrible approach. So to be a little bit more empathetic, one of the fears that people have is, oh my God, what am I going to get enough work? And because most of the work that comes to me now, this is them still speaking, most of that work comes to me through referrals. It just crosses the transom. It's, and it's all over the place. And I'm not worried about the end game. I'm worried about the transition to the end game.
Yeah.
And so what I say to them is that focus is about the work you look for, not the work you accept. So it's fine to accept some of that generalist work that you would have accepted yesterday, but what you don't want to do is tell people about it or make it public on your website. So you just keep doing it. Now, I want to add a twist that I think is pretty important in that. So if you think of the 3 phases of your career, moving towards being an expert. You have sort of the generalist approach. Then you have the final expert approach. But then there's this middle where you are looking for certain stuff, but you're accepting other stuff. That middle period will be a very unsatisfying experience, and you will find yourself getting a little disgusted with yourself and a little bit impatient, because the difference between doing work for people that you know a lot about and people you don't is so stark. And you'll begin to feel a little dirty about it. And that period will not last long. I've never seen it last more than 18 months. More typically, it's less than a year where you still have a foot on both sides of the fence.
100%. Right. Because you said earlier how you were sort of you felt maybe a little, I wouldn't say out of your depth, but you were like, I know what competence feels like, and this isn't it. And I don't like that I don't like the not feeling competent feeling. So it's the exact same thing, right? And depending on a lot of things, the work that you seek, the positioning and the marketing and everything you're doing to get the kinds of clients that you want, it can happen relatively quickly. I shouldn't say it like you definitely don't complete the transformation or the transition super fast, but you can pretty quickly. Like I've worked with people who are like in my coaching program, who are really good at executing on the advice that I give them and the homework that we put together. And when they're real directed and they don't sort of fishtail around too much, you can have demonstrable traffic with your demonstrable traction with your new positioning in 4 months. You can see immediately that like doesn't happen every time. It probably doesn't even happen most of the time, but it is not uncommon for it to happen. So that you can say, oh, I'm getting I see that I'm getting traction here. I'm getting inbound for the first time ever, like non-referral inbound requests. I'm getting people reaching out to me on LinkedIn that are like, we should set up a call.
Yeah. Like, and they're already pre-qualified because they've already decided, oh, this is kind of a fit. I just want to see what kind of a person this is. But obviously the expertise is a fit. Rather than you trying to spend the first 15 minutes of the call explaining how you do know something about their world, they just assume it because they've read, well, you've said it for one thing, but they've also read or listened to all kinds of evidence that you know their world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I agree 100% with the point you were making about you can absolutely in the transition period accept new work. You're probably gonna be like, oh wow, this feels like the old way. Yuck. I have that a lot with people who are transitioning away from hourly billing and they switch over to value pricing for their project work, and then they sort of chicken out and take on an hourly project, and they're like, oh, I forgot how bad this is.
Yeah, right.
It's like, oh.
Now I know why I don't touch the stove all the time. Exactly. I remember now. Yeah,
exactly. And it's similar with the positioning thing. So when I say to people, I'll be coaching someone, and the thing is, most of their work usually was from referrals, just like you said. And when it comes in, there's the, geez, this is money, I should take it. I don't get maybe 6 leads a year, so I need to take this. Also, our mutual friend that made the referral, there's a social obligation feeling that they don't want to say no because the friend extended their reputation to make the introduction, and then to be like, oh no, I don't work with people like that anymore.
Right.
That doesn't feel great.
But the way to salvage that in my mind is to be really honest about the fit, and then if you can, refer them to somebody that's a great fit, and then that kind of rescues the social connection part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's good. And so when I have someone who's wrestling with this decision, I say to it, and they're like, what should I do? And so we'll sort of go into the specifics of it, and we'll make a decision. And I'll say, but here's my rule. You cannot put a testimonial from them on your website. You cannot put their logo on your website. You are not allowed to. It's just a money. It's for the money. It's to give them the result they want and get paid fairly for it. But you are not going to use this in any of your marketing materials.
Right.
And sometimes that will flip the switch for them and be like, oh yeah, you're right. So it's a case by case thing. It depends on people's cash flow, a million things.
Right.
But yeah, cool. So, but I do love explicitly differentiating between the work that you seek and the work that you'll accept. They're not necessarily the same thing. Cool. All right. Number 4, you immediately begin the process of narrowing it even further. Say more.
Yeah. Yeah. Here I have to reluctantly refer to my podcast partner because, dang it, he's the one that came up with the phrase.
Oh, you mean our most successful guest on Ditching Hourly?
Yeah. So I'm talking about Blair Enns. We were recording an episode for our podcast and we were talking about this, and he said, he kind of rephrased what I was stumbling around to say. And he said, yeah, what you're not looking for the perfect positioning, you're looking for a perfectible positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And which is absolutely true. It's like a light went on in my head. And I want to add to that, though, and say that it is not perfectible until you go public with it and you begin testing it with prospects and with clients.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to a point in your deliberations where you feel like in your bones and based on the research that you've done, and there's some good research you can do, that this is it, okay? But it doesn't, the fog hasn't lifted completely. It's almost like releasing a minimally viable product where you just know that user testing from a small base is the only thing that's going to really improve it. There's nothing else you can do in the lab. It's going to have to go out in the marketplace. You're going to have to get dressed up, go to a party, and let people laugh at your clothes, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening here. And it usually takes longer. So 1 to 2 years is about typical. And every once in a while, 1 in 100 cases, you have to flip it because something happened. Either we missed some piece of data, which is unlikely, or the marketplace changed.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it gets even narrower, but you wouldn't see how to narrow it further until you'd play with it for a year or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It becomes obvious because what I say, that phase, what I say to people, I use different language, but it's the same thing, where we'll have a bunch of sort of candidate potential positioning statements. And I've got like different formats that you can use. Some are easier than others. Some are more complete and useful than others. But so we'll go through, sort of a brainstorming session, maybe go through their past experience and maybe pull from that or other circles or communities that they're in if they're going into a new direction or whatever. So we brainstorm some stuff. And it's really easy for me to see when something's not going to work. Like, no, that's the odds of that working are like 0, and you can see all the bad ones and kind of throw those out. And then usually it'll come down to like 1 or 2 that I feel like these could work. So then it's like, but to me, it's 100% hypothesis at that point.
Right. Yeah.
And it needs to be tested. And the way that you test it is through conversation. So then with people in the target market, does this resonate? Are these the right words to use? Like sometimes I'll have, I was working with someone now actually who I know what his positioning is. He and I both know what it is, but we haven't figured out how to say it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's almost cheating, but like we know a clunky way to say it, but it doesn't, you can't say it. It's too long. It's too confusing. It's very specific and clear, but it's lacking a certain poetry that maybe is, I don't know if it matters where I would draw the line. Is that part of the positioning or is that part of the messaging? It doesn't really matter. You still have to figure out how to say it.
Right.
And, but if it, and if someone said to me, or if this person, it's like, well, I'm going to try it this way and that way and the other way. And we don't know if this, when I say product to this market, do they think coffee cup or are they thinking like SaaS?
Oh, right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you need to figure it out. There's only one way to figure it out. It's like by talking to people in the target market and see if it resonates in the way, if the message is making it through to the other side or if it's just bouncing off them.
If I could pick up on a point you just made, you're not going to test it by slapping it on the top part of your homepage just because you're not going to learn when it doesn't strike somebody. They'll just go on. That learning is exactly like you said. It's in conversations with prospects and clients, mainly prospects, honestly, so that when you say something, you immediately know what didn't resonate, or you can see how they interpreted it not the way you intended. And that's when you learn from it. It's very much the difference between sort of a a blind email to somebody versus a cold sales call. Like you're not going to learn something from one of those. And I'm not advocating you go out and do the cold sales call much, but it is the way. It's the best way to learn. It's like slathering yourself in meat tenderizer and then jumping behind a zoo fence. So it's like, okay, something's going to happen here, right?
Yeah. There's no way to not get feedback. I had one student early on who was very social. He was in his 20s in San Francisco, went out a lot and would go to, it was a fairly savvy networker, back in the day. And when we were working together, he would just go to parties. And of course, people are going to ask, what do you do? And he would try a different version on everyone. Oh. And even though they weren't in the target market at all, I still like this approach because in my opinion, you tell me if you disagree, but in my opinion, a good positioning statement, it can hit anyone near your target market and still get you to the target.
Yeah.
Right.
They should understand it. It may not resonate, but the fact that it doesn't resonate means something.
Yes.
As long as they understand what it means and they say, oh, that's not me, but I know who somebody who is. That's a great test of a positioning statement.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this particular guy, actually, he had a bizarre target market. I had never even heard of this profession before that he was going to serve. And I think it was called a college counselor. And they're people who they are consultants basically that parents of high school children will hire to help get their kids into a really good school without breaking the bank. So it's sort of a advisory position.
Right.
And he gets in a cab and, he's the same guy. He's like always bouncing the idea off people. So the cabbie was a chatty guy and was like, hey, what do you do? And he said something like, I help college counselors get more leads. And the guy, and a lot of people in that same scenario would brush the cabbie off and just say like, oh, I do computers, or I'm a consultant, or I'm a lawyer,
right.
just like kind of
something that kills the conversation intentionally.
Exactly. So instead, and I'm a big fan of not judging the listener or the asker and just telling them the truth and not judging that they won't be capable of understanding what that thing is.
Right.
And sure enough, he said, oh, I help college counselors get more leads or better leads or whatever it was, increase their income. He's like, no way, my mother's a college counselor.
Oh,
I just put you guys in touch.
That's great. Yeah, busted.
Right. Yeah. So I love that story for both of those reasons. One, it's like don't judge the person who's asking what you do. Just tell them. Don't try and cater it to, I don't know, like to me, it's like super obnoxious to change it for everyone that you talk to. And then the other thing is, it's like you just never know, right? Like you never know. It's like everyone is so connected these days between social media and whatnot, that if you're really clear about who it is that you're here to help, they will gladly make an introduction, so it's when it starts working, everybody says the same thing to me. Like when you nail it, everyone says the same thing. It's like magic.
And it's fun now. It's not, new business is not something I dread, but I have to do it. Now it's fun because the conversations either resonate or they don't. And the fact that I've always felt like, listen, I'm not afraid of the truth. If we're not supposed to work together, I'd kind of like to know as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I don't want to have a conversation with somebody and they ask me what I do, I'll just say I do financial risk assessment for credit unions, and that always shuts it down. It's like no more chit chat after that.
I sell life insurance. You want to talk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we've beat number 4 into submission. So let's jump on to number 5.
Yeah.
This one I think will surprise people. So number 5 is you'll have lots more to talk and write about.
Yeah. It seems counterintuitive. And this hits people between the eyes because whatever their marketing plan looks like nowadays, you kind of have to give Google something to work with. And, whatever that is, audio, video, words, whatever it is. So it's going to involve you figuring out what sort of content or insight to produce. And if you're an undifferentiated firm, that's a really tough topic because you end up writing something that's equally interesting or not to most everybody, which means it's just ignorable content. And so you come to this decision with that tension of, oh goodness, what do I write or what do I talk about? And the last thing you want to do is narrow those options by having a tighter positioning, thinking that it's going to be even harder to do this stuff later. And I think this is another illustration that Blair gives sometimes, sort of this decision that you're provisionally going to make. Picture it as a door into a room, and you're afraid of getting trapped in that room. Now you're all over the house, but I'm telling you, go into this room. And one of the things that makes you nervous about it is like, well, what's in there? Like, what happens after I get in there? And you get in the room and you see all these windows and doors and passageways that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
I will never run out of things to talk about. It's just impossible now. I have almost 400 possible topics. More than half of them are already outlined, and I have an illustration at some stage of production from my illustrator. And it's just the most amazing thing that happens. You start to focus and you think, oh my goodness, I'll never run out of topics. And it's so much fun to think about, but it's counterintuitive enough that a lot of people are fearful of just the opposite happening.
I know, it's insane. While you were saying that, I flipped over to my drafts folder for my daily email.
Right.
I have 861 drafts.
Good thing you don't have OCD.
It is totally counterintuitive, but the more you focus down, the deeper the cavern goes. And there's just so much more to explore in there. And if we're talking about differentiation, it's going to set you apart from the shallow garbage that, people have at this point have AIs generating for their blogs so that Google's AIs can read their blog. And then maybe some human comes along and searches for it. But it's like you read some of these sort of generalist blogs and it feels like robots writing for robots.
Yeah. And it used to just bore me, and now it just annoys me because I've wasted my time yet again. When I go back to LinkedIn and I see a bunch of notifications that somebody's just contributed something, I'm really hesitant. It's like, okay, but you better not waste my time. This better not be some 7-point listicle that any high schooler could have written. And it's so much fun. I love the fact that it's just a wide open. If I decide that I wanted to mine gold in my spare time, I'm not going to go out with a shovel and just start digging. I think I'll start in the backyard, and then I'll go to the front yard, then I'll go to the neighbors after dark. And no, you figure out where the gold is, and then you dig very, very narrowly and specifically with the right tools, and that's where you're going to have the most luck. And it's different for every other focus. And I don't know why we don't kind of get that when we translate those principles to our world.
I know. I don't. It's just not modeled well. I don't know, right? It seems a little. I mean, I guess there is a paradox, a seeming paradox to it, which is like the more I focus my business, the bigger it gets. Like that seems impossible. And I've heard people say like, oh well, I only got 10 leads this year, and they were all over the map. If I focus down on just the dentists, then I'm only going to get one lead.
Right.
And it's like, no, you're like right now. I like the fishing analogy. It's like right now, when people say, oh, I don't want to, why would I focus down when I could be a generalist and cast a wide net? And it's like, no, you've got the metaphor wrong. It's the net is your marketing ability. So the net doesn't change. So being a generalist is fishing in the ocean with a teeny little net or like a single hook. And being a specialist is like fishing in a barrel stocked full of trout.
Right.
Nike has a big net. Apple has a big net. You, as a soloist, I talk to soloists mostly. A soloist does not have a big net, and they're never going to. So you need to have precision tools and focus your energy where it's going to be the most effective. And that's in the barrel of fish, the ocean has, I looked it up. It's got 3.5 trillion fish estimated.
Wow.
3.5 trillion. Why would I fish in a barrel of 1,000 trout when I could go out and get 3.5 trillion potentially?
Right.
It's like, okay, go ahead and go out on the ocean in your little dinghy.
But that's why there's no shows on Discovery Network of really capable fishermen that just throw a big ass net out, and then at the end of the day they sort up. Okay,
What did
Well,
we
we
get?
got 21 different varieties of fish. All right, somebody go figure out who's going to sell, who's going to buy this. And oh, shoot, we got a tire too. What are we going to do with that? It's like, no,
Tire.
those shows they're for shrimp or
Yeah.
they're for salmon
Lobster.
or.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. It's like pick what you're going after.
But
Um,
there's something about this that I think, sorry to interrupt you, just around the whole entrepreneurial spirit. And this one just perplexes me, even though not so much that I don't understand it because I see it in myself a little bit. But the best entrepreneurs are risk takers and they have can-do attitudes and they're disciplined enough and they're smart enough. They don't have to be brilliant, but they need to be above a certain level. And if they were starting out at the very beginning and they wrote out a list of things they could probably be successful at, there'd probably be 20 things on that list.
right.
And now they're just choosing one. And yet still they have this scarcity mindset that, oh my God, if I run out of opportunity, what's going to happen to me? And it's like the entrepreneurs I know, not a single one of them's going to starve. They're going to figure something out. That's not a really valid risk. It's not a valid argument about specialization, running out of opportunity, or running out of things to talk about either. It's the same thing, just the other
Yeah.
side of
Same
that
thing.
coin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like you couldn't eat 3.5 trillion fish if you could even catch them all. But if there's 1,000 trout in a pond or a barrel or whatever, you could probably only handle 10 of them. Right?
Right.
There's like way more opportunity than I think. I think part of the disconnect where the scarcity mindset comes from is because I think the human brain is just really bad at large numbers. And to your point earlier about we're all one click away globally, and you no longer have a geolocation sort of moat around you, a geography around you that keeps competitors out. The markets for whatever market you're going after is surely 10 or 100 times bigger than you think it is. So
Right.
they feel like, oh, there could only be so many, I don't know, CPAs in the United States that speak English, and it's like, I was making this point at a conference in Las Vegas one time, and before the presentation, I was like, I'm just going to Google like a local search, dentists near me, to see how many dentists there were. There were like 10,000 dentists within walking distance of the conference. And there were
Have you heard of the guy that named his firm that, Dentist Near Me? That way when he did a Google search, that's true.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. Now that's a smart person right there.
Yeah. Well, he'll need to figure out how to do remote dentistry, but okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, I mean, it was mind boggling. I mean, there was something like, I don't know, over 1 million. Like, I remember thinking, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they were mind boggling. They were thousands of times bigger than you could ever hope to service as a soloist. And I remember thinking, to your point earlier about niching down farther, you'd probably have to go with like periodontists or, like pediatric dentists or something, like something even more specific, because dentist was like, I'm like, oh, wow, that's still way too big. Like,
Yeah. Dentists who won't whine when I want more nitrous oxide. That would be the one I would get. But it is kind of crazy. I don't know how we think about, I don't know what comes in our minds sometimes, and how we just step away from this and we lose our confidence. Like, there's specific numbers behind this too. In my research, I found that it's a pretty safe assumption that if you are decently capable in the professional services space, you could, if you do most everything right, you could lock up about 1% of the opportunity. That's a pretty safe assumption.
Mhm.
So if you need, say, 20 clients a year, which is really more than you need, but let's say you need 20 clients a year, then you only need 2,000 prospects. Now, when I'm trying to evaluate a possible positioning decision, I try to get more around 10,000 or so, but there's no reason you got to have more than that. So let's keep niching down. Maybe not right away, but maybe this is what happens when you look to narrow it further, as you see even more patterns that weren't apparent right at the boundary of making that positioning. It's just a wonderful journey. I'm so grateful that I've been around people that think this way. I've got so many clients that think this way. I'm so glad that people like you and others understand this and make good arguments for it. It's just a better world that way, and we deliver better value to our clients too. It's not just about making more money, which is obviously true, but it's about delivering better value too.
Yeah, and that's why it's, as much as I talk about value pricing, and I think most people know me for that, you can't do it without positioning.
Oh yeah, right, exactly.
You literally cannot be an undifferentiated generalist and well, I mean, you can do it, but it won't change your income. I mean, it's not going to be a home run for you. You could try it, but people are going to be like, I'm just going to get the $10 an hour web designer. Like, what do you ask? Like, what do you ask me why I need a website? I just want a web designer. Can you just do what I want?
Hmm.
And so like for me, step one with every student that goes through my coaching program is step one is positioning, because I don't know what to do. If we don't have that, there's nothing for me to do.
Yeah, everything that follows is murky. Like, okay, I don't know what they're losing sleep over. I don't know what water coolers they're hanging around.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what service offerings to do. I don't even know who to hire to fulfill these promises. Until we get the positioning right, nothing else falls into place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a thing I noticed that reminded me of when you were talking about you'll never run out of things to write is a lot of folks who have sort of got the memo that, geez, I need a blog because I guess business like reasons, they just think they need to blog. They don't have this burning desire to blog. And they think they have writer's block, and they just I just never, it's every blog post starts with, boy, it's been a while since I blogged. So I can't believe it's been
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah.
And it's just torture. It takes them days to crank out an 800-word post or something. And to me, it's like, you don't have writer's block. You don't know what to write because you haven't decided who it's for. You don't know who you're talking to.
Right. It's not an output block like writer's block. It's an input block.
Yeah. So you literally don't know what words to choose. You're constantly second guessing your word choice, or just to pick one thing. You don't know if, like I said before with the doctors, you don't know whether you should talk about guests. It's like if you're talking to a hospitality client audience, or patients if you're talking to like a medical audience, or clients if you're talking to professional services, or customers if you're talking to product businesses. You don't even know what to call the people they sell to. So how are you gonna? And that's just one example. There's just hundreds of these things that come up, and you're like, I don't know what to say. It's like, because you don't know who you're talking to. You just have to pick.
And then that's when a blog. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I know what to say.
And that's when a blog devolves into a newsletter where you know how to talk about this. And it's just like nobody really cares about the new person you hired, or about some of the work you did for somebody else last year that doesn't relate to them at all. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's like, and they're more and more, I see more and more people talking about this. It could be confirmation bias because I'm aware of it now, and I sort of swim in these circles, but I do see more people talking about the benefits of niching down. And this particular, I love this particular article that you wrote, because it focuses right on that point after you've already figured it out. Like, we could talk for days about how to do it, how to convince yourself to do it, why it's good, and all those things. And some of that's come up here. But I really liked that point right after, the sort of buyer's remorse of of positioning.
Yeah.
And then, like, okay, we've got a hypothesis here. Like, and maybe they even go for it. They start talking about it on LinkedIn. Usually I have people, if their audience, their new target market is active on LinkedIn, I'll just say, all right, let's just change your headline there on your LinkedIn and see if anything happens. And sometimes it does.
And it requires so much courage. Meanwhile, there are people in Ukraine defending their homes with guns, and we're terrified of changing our LinkedIn title.
You said something earlier about that. The entrepreneurs have 20 different things they could do. And like, there's a whole conversation to be had about the sort of human animals, the modern human, or whatever you want to call it, current crop of humans. They're just so bad at accurately estimating risk. Like, people are, there's two components to risk: likelihood of a loss and the impact of a loss.
Yeah.
And you talk to people that just like, okay, just update your LinkedIn headline, and they act like the likelihood of a huge loss happening is imminent. It's
Yeah.
like high. And it's like, what could go wrong? What
Well,
possibly could go wrong?
when that happens with me, and this is always plan B, C, or D, it's never my first choice. If I cannot get them to publicly abandon their generalist approach, then I just tell them, okay, all we got to do here is, I don't know anything else. We just got to do a sub brand. You
Hmm.
can't have two. You can't have two marketing plans. Lord knows you've not even done one well. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to expect you to do two. But you've never done marketing for this generalist firm the way it should be done anyway. Those things will be coming anyway, just like they always have. Here, your marketing plan is going to be around the sub brand. I don't think it's the first choice you should make, but it's much better than just sitting there and not making a decision.
Hmm. Yeah, I do something similar with sometimes. Honestly, I haven't had someone that just couldn't. I think I probably scared those people away. Like people know when that like this is part of the deal if you're going to work with me.
Right.
But there have been times where I had really heavy resistance from someone, and so what we did is we would create a service like a productized service, and then we would do all the positioning on that, and
Right.
make that thing. This instead of saying I help. I don't know, musical equipment manufacturers kick copycat products off the internet, or something really nice and crispy. If they can't bring themselves to do that, they're getting too many referrals or whatever, and then they like it. Then say, okay, let's make a productized service that is for someone specific, like hyper specific. It has and once you pick that, then you can say, okay, what promise can we make to those people? What is the thing what's their expensive problem? What can, what are but it's instead of saying I help, blah, 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 blah. It's like this service is for people like this who have this kind of a problem, and it's unlike the other options in these ways. And sometimes that's been an approach that would get people to move forward.
Yeah.
I actually had one friend who it wasn't a student, but a friend of mine who had a firm, kind of maybe a little small at the time for somebody you would work with, I suppose. But I think it was about 4 or 5 people, and he was sort of a co-founder, and he was trying to convince his partners to niche down on people who sell on Shopify. They were just a sort of generalist web design firm.
Right.
And he's like, let's just focus on Shopify. This was a while ago. Shopify was still new, but it seemed to really be happening. Couldn't convince the partners to do it for all the reasons that you're probably have heard a million times. And he said, okay, what about this? Let's start a different website with a specific name, and we'll just sell this. It'll just be one page, and it'll just be for people who sell like physical goods on Shopify. And they're like, all right, yeah, fine, do that. I don't know, like 18 months later, it was the entire business. Like
Yeah.
it
Exactly.
just like completely proved the model. And at the same time, he jumped on a platform right at the perfect time and had this sort of platform specialization. So there's a timing factor here too, but it is maybe an approach for people. But I agree with you. It's like, especially for soloists, don't try and. I get this all the time. What if I have 2 websites? And I know I just described that, but that was a firm, and whatever, they had the energy to do it. But if you can't manage the marketing for one business on your own,
Yeah.
like what makes you think you're going to suddenly have twice as much energy to do 2? It's just
Let's be
not
real.
realistic.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. Wow. Okay. What is there anything else we should talk about? This has been great. We went through all 5 things. I think we got some cool tangents in there too.
I've thought of some other episode we should do someday, but for this
Oh,
topic, I think this is really nicely tied up.
perfect. Great. Well, this has been super fun. Where can people go to find out more about you online?
So my business website is davidcbaker.com, and there's lots of free stuff. Almost everything there is free if you want to learn more. And then the most recent book is The Business of Expertise, which is at expertise.is.is. So those 2 would probably be your best bets.
Cool. Yes. And listeners, if you haven't heard the previous episode that we recorded together, it was about that book. So if you're curious about that and want to check it out, just search back through I don't know how you actually do it. I guess just search back through in your podcast player for David's name, and you will find that. And also sign up for his mailing list. It's one of the best I'm on, and I'm super picky about mailing lists. I'm always glad I read it, even though they're not short and sweet like mine. They're long and sweet. So I'm always glad I read it. And look, invited you on the show to talk about one of them.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for this time. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next week for Ditching Hourly. Bye.